Julian Vance existed in a world of brushed steel and silent glass. From his corner office on the 82nd floor, the city was a schematic of distant, glittering lights, a beautiful and complex machine that he commanded but could not feel. The silence in the room was absolute, a manufactured quiet that absorbed the frantic energy of the metropolis below, leaving only the soft hum of the climate control and the steady, lonely beat of his own heart. He stood before the floor-to-ceiling window, not seeing the view, but seeing a reflection of a man in a perfectly tailored suit, a stranger who wore his face. On his vast mahogany desk, amidst the sleek, minimalist technology, sat a single silver frame. It held the smiling face of a woman with eyes that seemed to hold all the warmth that was absent from the room. Sarah. Her smile was from another lifetime, a forgotten language of joy he could no longer speak. He traced the cool glass over her cheek, a ritual he performed every evening before descending back into the sterile silence of his penthouse. The photograph was not a comfort. It was a testament to his failure, a daily reminder of the warmth he had lost and his inability to prevent it. Grief was not a storm in his life, it was the climate. It was the perpetual chill in his bones, the muted color palette of his world. He managed it the way he managed his multi-billion-dollar corporation, with ruthless efficiency, compartmentalization, and a strict, unyielding control. Emotions were liabilities, unpredictable variables that could disrupt the system. He had locked them away in a vault deep inside himself, and he had long since forgotten the combination. Down in the city, nestled on a quiet street far from the imposing glass towers, was a small bakery called the Humble Crumb. It was the antithesis of Julian's world. The air inside was thick with the scent of cinnamon, melting butter, and rising bread. Warmth radiated from the old brick oven in the back, and the light that filtered through the front window was golden and soft, illuminating the flour dust that danced in the air like lazy fairies. Clara Reed moved through this warmth as if she were a part of it. Her hands, dusted with flour, were rarely still. She kneaded dough with a gentle strength, her brow furrowed in concentration, a stray strand of honey blonde hair falling across her cheek. The bakery was her sanctuary and her struggle. It barely broke even, a constant source of worry that settled in her chest at night, but it was hers. It was a place where she could create something good, something warm, and offer it to the world. At a small, crayon-scarred wooden table in the corner sat her entire world, a 5-year-old girl with eyes the color of summer sky and a spirit as bright as the sun. Lily was a whirlwind of innocent questions and profound observations. She was drawing, her tongue sticking out from the corner of her mouth in concentration. Her picture was a vibrant, chaotic masterpiece of a yellow sun, a lopsided house, and 2 smiling stick figures holding hands. One was labeled Mommy, the other, Lily. There was a hopeful, empty space beside them. Clara's life was a delicate balance of rising dough and mounting bills, of boundless love for her daughter and the quiet, persistent ache of loneliness. She was resilient, a survivor who had learned to find joy in the small, simple things. The perfect crackle of a creme brulee crust, the smell of rain on hot pavement, the weight of Lily's sleeping head on her shoulder. She didn't dream of wealth or status. She dreamed of security, of a day when the worry in her chest might finally ease its grip. One Saturday, the city hosted its annual fall festival in the largest park. Julian took Lily, not out of desire, but out of a sense of grim duty. His parenting was a checklist of obligations, school functions, doctor appointments, scheduled recreational activities. He stood stiffly by the carousel, his dark gray suit an anomaly in the sea of casual weekend attire. The sounds of cheerful music, laughing children, and barking dogs were a grating cacophony to him. He felt like a ghost at a feast, present in form but absent in spirit. Lily, however, was in her element. Her small hand slipped from his distracted grasp. She was a butterfly, flitting from one wonder to the next, her bright pink coat a splash of life against the muted tones of the afternoon. Julian's heart seized with a familiar, cold panic. It was the terror that lived just beneath the surface of his control, the fear of loss that was his constant companion. He scanned the crowd, his face a mask of stone, but his eyes were wild. Lily had been drawn by a scent, a magnetic pull of sugar and spice that cut through the smell of popcorn and roasted nuts. It led her to a small, unassuming stall decorated with checkered cloth and handwritten signs. Behind a table laden with golden croissants, glistening fruit tarts, and cinnamon rolls spiraled like happy snails, stood a woman with a kind face and flower on her nose. It was Clara, trying to earn a little extra to cover the rent for the month. The little girl stopped and stared up at the array of treats, her eyes wide with wonder. Then her gaze shifted to the woman. She saw the gentle way Clara smiled at another customer, the warmth in her eyes. Lily stepped forward, unafraid, uninhibited by the rules of strangers. Clara looked down to see a small, serious face looking up at her. "Hello there," she said, her voice soft. Lily didn't ask for a cookie. She held up a slightly crumpled drawing she had been clutching in her hand. It was a picture of a sad-faced man standing under a gray cloud. "My daddy is sad," she announced, her voice clear and certain. "Can your cookies make him happy?" The simple, profound question caught Clara off guard. She knelt down, bringing herself to the child's level. She looked at the drawing, at the heartbreakingly accurate depiction of sorrow. "I don't know about happy," she said gently, "but sometimes they can make things feel a little bit warmer. What's your name?" "Lily. It's very nice to meet you, Lily." "I'm Clara," she smiled, and for a moment, the worry lines around her eyes softened. Just then, a tall, imposing figure cast a shadow over the stall. "Lily." Julian's voice was sharp, laced with the panic he had just suppressed. He saw his daughter talking to a stranger, and his carefully constructed walls went up, thick and impenetrable. He reached for Lily's hand, his touch firm. Clara stood up quickly, her heart fluttering with a nervous beat. The man before her was handsome, but his face was carved from ice. His eyes were cold, guarded, and filled with a deep, unsettling sadness that mirrored the child's drawing. "I'm so sorry," she began, her cheeks flushing. She just walked up. "We were just talking." Julian looked from Clara to Lily, then at the table of pastries. His gaze was clinical, assessing. He was used to people wanting something from him, a calculated kindness that always preceded a request. But this woman's apology seemed genuine, her concern real. He saw the flower on her nose and the weariness in her eyes, but also an open, unguarded warmth that was utterly foreign to him. Lily tugged on his hand. "Daddy, this is Clara. She has warm cookies." She looked at Clara. "He needs a warm one." The innocence of the statement hung in the air between them. For the first time in years, a crack appeared in Julian's armor. It was infinitesimally small, but it was there. He looked at Clara, truly looked at her, and saw not a threat, not an opportunist, but just a kind woman. He fumbled for his wallet, his movements stiff and awkward. "We'll take a cinnamon roll," he said, the words feeling strange in his mouth. Clara packed the pastry into a small white bag, her hands moving with a practiced grace. "There's no charge," she said softly, pushing the bag towards him. "It's a gift. For Lily." He stared at her, confused. People didn't give him things. They took. "I can pay for it." "I know," she replied with a small, knowing smile. "But please, just accept it." He took the bag. Their fingers brushed for a fraction of a second. Her skin was warm. His was cold. The contrast was a small electric shock that traveled up his arm. He mumbled a thank you, his voice barely a whisper, and guided Lily away from the stall, not looking back. But he could feel Clara's gentle gaze on him long after they had disappeared into the crowd. That night, long after Lily was asleep, he sat in his silent kitchen and ate the cinnamon roll. It was warm, soft, and sweet. It tasted like a memory of a life he thought he had forgotten. Days turned into a week. The memory of the woman in the park and the taste of the cinnamon roll lingered in Julian's mind like a strange, gentle echo. Lily talked about the cookie lady incessantly, weaving her into fantastical stories and drawing her into every family portrait. Julian found himself listening, a part of him strangely captivated by his daughter's innocent fascination. The name of her bakery, the Humble Crumb, was mentioned, a detail he had missed but Lily had absorbed. One afternoon, he left a meeting early, a rare and impulsive act. He drove, not towards his sterile office or his empty home, but through the winding, unfamiliar streets of a neighborhood he hadn't visited in years. He told himself he was doing it for Lily, a convenient excuse to mask the quiet pull he felt, the illogical curiosity that was chipping away at his rigid control. He found the bakery, a small beacon of warmth on a gray street. He parked his sleek, black car, a vehicle that was worth more than the entire block, and hesitated. This was not his world. This was a place of vulnerability, of small, messy, human connections. He was about to drive away when he saw Clara through the window. She was standing on a stepladder, stretching to fix a string of fairy lights that had come loose. She looked precarious, and he acted on an instinct he thought had long since died. He entered the shop. A small bell chimed, announcing his arrival. The wave of warm, sweet air was a physical comfort. Clara startled on the ladder, wobbling slightly. Julian moved forward quickly, his hands hovering, ready to steady her. "Be careful," he said, his voice deeper, softer than it was in a boardroom. Clara looked down, her eyes wide with surprise to see the cold, sad man from the park standing in her bakery. "Oh," she said, her heart giving a little jump. "Hello. I didn't expect to see you." She carefully climbed down, her face flushed. "Is Lily with you?" "No, she's at school," he replied, feeling suddenly exposed without his daughter as a buffer. He gestured vaguely at the lights. "It looked like you needed some help." "It's fine. I can manage," she said, a little too quickly. Her independence was a shield she wore constantly. But the truth was, the lights had been broken for a week, and she hadn't had the time or the right tools to fix them. Julian didn't argue. He simply took a look, identified the frayed wire near the plug, and said, "I can fix that. Do you have any electrical tape?" She was taken aback by the direct, simple offer. She retrieved a roll of tape from a cluttered drawer. He took it, and with a quiet competence, repaired the wire. When he plugged the cord back in, the tiny lights flickered to life, casting a magical, twinkling glow across the ceiling. Clara stared at the lights, a genuine, unburdened smile spreading across her face. It transformed her, chasing away the shadows of worry. "Thank you," she said, her voice filled with sincere gratitude. "I've been meaning to do that for ages." "It was nothing," he said, though it felt like something. It felt like he had created a small piece of light in a dim corner. "Please," she insisted, gesturing to a small table. "Let me get you a coffee. It's the least I can do." He found himself agreeing. He sat at the small wooden table where Lily usually drew her pictures. It was strange to be here, in this cozy, imperfect space. He could see the cracks in the plaster, the worn spots on the wooden floor. But it felt more real, more alive, than his entire penthouse. Clara brought over 2 mugs of coffee and a plate with a warm croissant. They sat in a comfortable silence for a moment. The only sounds the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant traffic. It was a different kind of silence than the one he was used to. This one was peaceful, not empty. "Lily talks about you a lot," he said, breaking the quiet. "She calls you the cookie lady." Clara laughed, a soft, musical sound. "She's an amazing little girl. She has so much light in her." She paused, then looked at him, her gaze direct but gentle. "She gets that from her mother, I imagine." The mention of Sarah was like a sudden pressure drop in the room. Julian's posture stiffened. People avoided mentioning his wife, treating her memory like a fragile artifact that might shatter if spoken of. "Yes," he said, his voice flat. "She was very bright." Clara sensed his retreat, the walls sliding back into place. But she didn't recoil. She simply held his gaze, her expression one of quiet understanding, not pity. "The cinnamon roll you bought," she said softly. "It's my grandmother's recipe. It was always my favorite. A little piece of home." He looked down at his coffee, a flicker of memory stirring. "Sarah loved cinnamon," he said, the admission a crack of vulnerability. "She used to put it in everything. Coffee, apple pie. She said it was the color of a happy smell." He looked up and met Clara's eyes. He saw no judgment, no discomfort. He saw only a quiet, empathetic acceptance. In that small, warm bakery, surrounded by the scent of sugar and spice, Julian Vance felt a sliver of warmth reach the frozen core of his heart. It was a fragile, unfamiliar feeling, but it was there, and it was a start. That first coffee became a quiet routine. Julian found reasons, however flimsy, to be in her neighborhood. A supplier he needed to visit, a route that was supposedly faster. He would appear at the door of the Humble Crumb in the late afternoon, just as the school rush was ending. He and Clara would talk, their conversations growing from stilted pleasantries into a gentle exchange of stories. He learned about her dream of expanding the bakery, of having a small garden out back. She learned about the immense pressure of his work, the crushing loneliness of being at the top. He never spoke of Sarah, and she never asked. They respected the invisible boundaries around each other's pain, sensing that trust had to be built one brick at a time. Lily, of course, was the architect of their connection. For her, Julian and Clara's friendship was the most natural thing in the world. The bakery became their shared space. Julian would often arrive to find Lily perched on a stool, diligently, helping Clara by dusting flour everywhere or arranging sprinkles into colorful, chaotic patterns. The sight of his daughter, so happy and covered in a fine white powder, would stir something protective and tender inside him. He started to help. He was a man who built corporate empires, who moved markets with a single decision. But in the bakery, his skills were different. He fixed the leaky faucet under the sink, his expensive suit jacket draped carefully over a chair. He used his formidable business acumen to renegotiate her contract with a flour supplier, saving her a significant amount of money. He did it all quietly, without fanfare, as if he were simply balancing a ledger. These small acts of service were his language of care, the only one he felt fluent in. One rainy Thursday evening, Julian arrived later than usual. A brutal board meeting had left him feeling drained and hollow. The city was a mess of slick streets and blurred lights. He found Clara in the bakery alone, boxing up the last of the day's unsold bread. Lily was asleep on a small cot in the back office, tucked under a blanket, a half-finished drawing of a three-headed unicorn beside her. "Tough day?" Clara asked softly, noticing the deep exhaustion etched on his face. He nodded, slumping into a chair. "They're all tough days." She didn't offer platitudes. Instead, she poured 2 glasses of red wine she kept for special occasions, though most of the time, the only special occasion was making it through another week. She sat down across from him, the twinkling fairy lights he'd fixed reflecting in her eyes. The rain pattered against the window pane, cocooning them in their small bubble of warmth. They sat in silence for a long time, sipping their wine. Julian felt the tight knot of tension in his shoulders begin to loosen. Here, he wasn't Julian Vance, the CEO. He was just Julian, a tired man sitting in a quiet bakery with a kind woman. "Why do you do it?" she asked gently. "The job. It seems to take so much from you." He stared into his glass. "I built the company with her," he said, his voice low. "With Sarah. It was our dream. After she was gone, it was all I had left of her. I thought if I kept building it, made it bigger, more successful, that somehow I was keeping her memory alive, that I was honoring her." He gave a short, bitter laugh. "But now it just feels like an empty monument. A gilded cage." He finally looked at her, his eyes raw with a grief he had kept hidden for so long. "She was killed," he said, the words falling like stones into the quiet room. "A hit and run. 4 years ago. She was crossing the street to meet me for dinner. I was late, stuck in a meeting." The guilt was a toxic undercurrent in his voice, the self-blame he had carried like a shroud. They never found who did it. No witnesses, no cameras. Just gone. 1 minute she was there, and the next, he couldn't finish. The control he so fiercely maintained was cracking, the vault of his emotions pried open. Clara's heart ached for him. She didn't reach out to touch him, sensing he needed the space. Her presence was her comfort. She simply listened, her empathy a quiet, steady anchor in his storm. "I am so sorry, Julian," she whispered. "That is an unbearable thing to carry." He took a shaky breath, feeling a strange lightness. The secret, spoken aloud, had lost some of its terrible weight. He had shared the ugliest, most painful part of himself, and she hadn't flinched. She hadn't looked away. "My parents died when I was in college," she offered, her own voice soft with memory. "A car accident, too. For a long time, I felt like I was drifting. This bakery, it was the first thing that made me feel grounded again, like I could build something that would last." Their shared stories of loss and resilience wove a new, stronger thread between them. It was a bond forged not in joy, but in the quiet understanding of survival. He saw her then, not just as a kind baker, but as a woman of immense strength, a fellow traveler who knew the geography of grief. Later, as he prepared to leave, he stood by the door, reluctant to step back out into the cold rain. "Thank you, Clara," he said, his voice thick with unspoken emotion. "For listening." "There's nothing to thank me for," she said, her smile small but genuine. "We all have our stories, Julian. Sometimes it just helps to have someone to tell them to." As he drove home through the sleeping city, Julian felt a profound shift within him. The silence in his car didn't feel empty anymore. It felt peaceful. For the first time in 4 years, he felt a flicker of something he had long since given up on: hope. In the weeks that followed, the change in Julian was palpable. The rigid lines of his face began to soften. A smile, at first tentative and rare, started to visit his lips more often, especially when he was with Lily and Clara. He was still a man of immense wealth and power, but he began to inhabit his life differently. He started leaving the office at a reasonable hour, his evenings reserved for the warm, flower-dusted world of the Humble Crumb. He watched Clara, mesmerized by her simple, profound grace. He watched the way she comforted a crying Lily with a hug and a warm cookie, the way she greeted her regular customers by name, the way her face lit up when a loaf of bread rose perfectly in the oven. He was falling in love with her, a slow, gentle, and terrifying realization. Love, to him, had become synonymous with loss, a prelude to unbearable pain. But with Clara, it felt different. It felt like coming home. Clara, too, was navigating the unfamiliar territory of her own heart. She saw the good man beneath Julian's formidable exterior. She saw his deep, unwavering love for Lily, his hidden kindness, his profound loneliness. She found herself relying on his steady presence, his quiet support. The financial worry that had been her constant companion began to ease, not just because of his practical help, but because she no longer felt like she was facing it all alone. Lily, in her innocent wisdom, had already accepted their new reality. Her drawings now consistently featured 3 figures. One day, she presented a new masterpiece to Clara. It was a drawing of the bakery, with a tall stick figure, a smaller one, and a medium one, all holding hands behind the counter. She had labeled them Daddy, Lily, and Mommy Clara. Clara's breath caught in her throat. She looked at Julian, who was standing beside her, a look of stunned tenderness on his face. He knelt down to Lily's level. "That's a beautiful picture, sweetie," he said, his voice a little thick. "A very beautiful family." The word hung in the air, full of possibility and weight. It felt like a turning point, a silent acknowledgement of what was growing between them. The future, once a terrifying void for Julian and a precarious path for Clara, was beginning to look like a shared horizon. The next afternoon was a picture of their newfound domesticity. A local news channel was playing quietly on a small television perched on a shelf in the bakery. Clara was showing Lily how to braid challah dough, their hands and faces smudged with flour. Julian was sitting at their table, reviewing Clara's quarterly finances on his tablet, a small, contented smile on his face as he listened to their happy chatter. Suddenly, a news anchor's serious tone cut through the cozy atmosphere. "We interrupt this program with breaking news in a long unsolved cold case." Julian looked up, his attention snagged. Clara paused, her hands still on the dough. "The police department has announced a major development in the fatal hit-and-run of Sarah Vance, wife of billionaire CEO Julian Vance. For years ago," the anchor continued. Julian's blood ran cold. He felt the air leave his lungs. "Thanks to new forensic technology and a recently discovered partial security tape from a nearby building, investigators have been able to create a new, digitally enhanced composite sketch of the suspected driver," the anchor said. "We're showing you that sketch now." On the screen, an image materialized. It was a man's face, grainy and indistinct in some areas, but eerily clear in others. It was a face of shadows and pixels, generic yet specific. It had dark hair, a strong jawline, and deep-set, haunted eyes. Eyes that looked familiar. Julian stared, his heart hammering against his ribs. The past was reaching out, a cold, dead hand, pulling him back into the darkness. Lily, who had been watching the screen with a child's unfiltered curiosity, looked from the television to her father. She tilted her head, her expression one of simple, innocent recognition. She pointed a small, flour-covered finger at the screen. "Daddy," she said, her voice piping and clear in the suddenly silent bakery. "The police sketch looks like you." The words, so innocent, so guileless, struck Julian like a physical blow. He felt the blood drain from his face, a glacial cold spreading through his veins. His carefully rebuilt world shattered into a million pieces. The sketch did look like him. It was a cruel, nightmarish caricature, a funhouse mirror reflection twisted by grief and imperfect data, but the resemblance was undeniable. The dark hair, the jaw, the sorrow in the eyes. It was a ghost of his own face from 4 years ago, a face ravaged by the very loss this phantom had caused. Clara gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. She looked from the sketch to Julian's ashen face, and back again. Her mind reeled, unable to process the horrific juxtaposition. It was impossible. It was ludicrous. But the image was there, and Julian's reaction was not one of indignant denial. It was one of pure, abject terror. He saw the flicker of confusion in her eyes. It wasn't disbelief in him, not yet, but it was the seed of a question, a horrifying crack in the foundation of their trust. In that moment, his deepest, most primal fear was realized, that the trauma that defined him would inevitably poison everything he touched. He believed he was cursed, and this was the proof. The universe was so cruel that it would paint him as the monster who had destroyed his own life. He couldn't breathe. The warm, safe bakery suddenly felt like a cage, the walls closing in. The scent of cinnamon was cloying, suffocating. He couldn't look at Clara. He couldn't bear to see the question in her eyes morph into suspicion, into fear of him. The old, cold armor slammed back into place, thicker and more impenetrable than ever before. "Lily, we're leaving," he said, his voice a hoarse, unrecognizable rasp. He grabbed his jacket, his movements jerky and panicked. "But Daddy, we're making bread," Lily said, her face crumpling in confusion. "With Mommy Clara." The innocent use of the word mommy was another knife in his heart. He scooped her up, ignoring her small cry of protest. "Now, Lily." "Julian, wait," Clara pleaded, reaching a hand toward him, her face a mask of bewilderment and concern. "Julian, talk to me. What is happening?" He flinched away from her touch as if it were fire. He couldn't speak. He couldn't explain the irrational, overwhelming shame and terror that was choking him. To him, the sketch was not an accusation of a crime. It was a verdict on his very soul. It confirmed his deepest fear, that he was a source of pain, that he was fundamentally broken, and that anyone who got close to him would be destroyed. Pushing her away felt like a perverse act of protection. He was saving her from him. He turned and fled, leaving Clara standing alone in the middle of her warm, twinkling bakery, which now felt cavernous and cold. He left her with the ghost on the television screen, the echo of his daughter's words, and the deafening silence of his departure. He ran, not from the police, but from the hope he had just begun to allow himself to feel. The days that followed were a descent back into a familiar hell for Julian. He locked himself away in his penthouse, a fortress of glass and silence high above the city. He didn't go to the office. He didn't answer his phone. The world outside ceased to exist. His only contact was with his household staff, to whom he gave clipped, impersonal orders. He was a ghost once more, haunting the pristine, empty rooms of his life. He sent Lily to stay with her grandmother, unable to face the innocent eyes that had delivered the devastating blow. He loved his daughter more than life itself, but right now, her presence was a searing reminder of what he had just lost, of the family he had allowed himself to dream of for a fleeting, beautiful moment. His mind was a relentless tormentor. He saw the sketch everywhere, in his reflection, in the shadows in the corner of the room. He replayed the moment in the bakery over and over. He saw the confusion on Clara's face, and in his panicked, grief-stricken mind, he twisted it into accusation. He convinced himself that she could never look at him again without seeing that monstrous caricature. He had brought the ugliness of his past into her warm, safe world, and he could never forgive himself for it. For Clara, Julian's disappearance was a profound and painful wound. The silence from his end was absolute. Her calls went to voicemail. Her texts remained unanswered. She walked through her days and a daze, the bakery feeling hollow and joyless. The twinkling lights he had fixed now seemed to mock her. She never for a second believed he was guilty of the crime. That was an absurdity her heart and mind rejected completely. She knew the man. She knew his deep, abiding grief for his wife. What haunted her was not the sketch. but his reaction to it. She couldn't understand why he would run, why he would shut her out so completely and cruelly. She felt foolish, heartbroken, and utterly lost. Had she imagined the connection between them? Had it all been a fragile illusion, shattered by the first brush with his past? She tried to keep things normal for Lily's sake, but Lily wasn't there. When she called Julian's house, a stern housekeeper informed her that Miss Lily was out of town with her grandmother. The finality of it was a slap in the face. He had not only removed himself from her life, but he had taken the child who had brought them together in the first place. A week passed, an eternity of silence and sorrow. Clara felt the old tendrils of worry and loneliness creep back into her life. The bakery, once her sanctuary, now felt like a testament to her foolish, broken heart. She was packing up one evening, the weight of the last week pressing down on her, when she decided she couldn't live in the silence anymore. She needed to know. She needed to understand. Meanwhile, in his self-imposed prison, Julian was beginning to fracture. The isolation was no longer a shield. It was an echo chamber for his pain. He wasn't eating. He wasn't sleeping. He was simply existing, adrift in a sea of misery. One evening, his butler, Mr. Abernathy, a kind, elderly man who had been with the family for decades and had known Sarah well, entered the study without being summoned. He placed a small, folded piece of paper on the desk beside Julian's untouched dinner tray. "Pardon the intrusion, Mr. Vance," the butler said, his voice gentle but firm. "This arrived by courier from your mother's house. I believe it is from young Miss Lily." Julian stared at the paper, unwilling to touch it. Mr. Abernathy did not leave. He simply stood by the door, a silent, patient sentinel. Finally, with a trembling hand, Julian unfolded the drawing. It was drawn with a child's unsteady hand, but the emotion was devastatingly clear. On one side of the page was a tall stick figure, unmistakably Julian, with big, blue crayon tears running down his face. On the other side was a figure with blonde hair, Clara, with a matching sad face. In the middle, impossibly small between them, was Lily. Her arms were stretched out wide, her tiny stick hands not quite reaching the two adults. It was a picture of a broken bridge, a family torn apart. He stared at the drawing, and something inside him finally broke. It wasn't the grief for his wife. It was a new, sharper grief. It was the grief for the future he was actively destroying. He saw his own selfish pain reflected in his daughter's art. He had been so consumed by his own fear, his own ghosts, that he hadn't considered their pain. He hadn't thought of Lily, confused and separated from the two people she loved most. And he hadn't thought of Clara, abandoned without a word, left to believe the worst. He had run from a phantom resemblance, a cruel trick of light and shadow. But in doing so, he had become a different kind of monster, a coward. A man who inflicted pain on the people he loved because he was too afraid to fight for them. He was punishing Clara for his trauma. He was punishing Lily for her innocence. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow, knocking the air from his lungs and leaving him gasping with shame. The sketch didn't matter. The police didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was the woman with flour on her nose and the little girl who drew pictures of their family. He had chosen fear over trust. He had chosen the past over the future, and it was the wrong choice. He stood up, his body infused with a sudden, desperate clarity. He had to fix it. He didn't know if he could, but he had to try. He grabbed his car keys, his heart pounding with a mixture of terror and a fragile, burgeoning hope. He had to go to her. He had to tell her everything. He drove through the rain-slicked city, the world a blur of neon and darkness. He rehearsed apologies in his head, but they all sounded hollow, inadequate for the pain he had caused. He realized there were no magic words. There was only the truth. He pulled up outside the Humble Crumb. It was late, the lights inside soft and low. Through the window, he could see her. She was sitting alone at the small table, her head in her hands. The sight of her, so solitary and sad, was a dagger in his heart. He took a deep breath and pushed open the door. The little bell chimed, a sound that now felt like a prelude to judgment. Clara looked up, her eyes widening in shock. They were red-rimmed, her face pale. She stood slowly, her expression a mixture of anger, hurt, and a deep, weary sorrow. "Julian," she whispered, her voice barely audible. He stood there, just inside the door, dripping rainwater onto her worn wooden floor. He didn't offer excuses. He didn't try to explain away his behavior. He simply started with the truth, his voice raw and unsteady. "I am so sorry, Clara," he began, the words aching in his throat. "What I did was unforgivable. I ran. I panicked. And I hurt you. There is no excuse for it." She just stared at him, her arms crossed over her chest, a protective barrier. "Why, Julian? Why would you just disappear? Did you think I would believe it? That I would think you were that man?" "No," he said, shaking his head, taking a hesitant step closer. "No, it wasn't that. Not really. When Lily said those words, and I saw the look on your face, it wasn't that I thought you'd believe it. It was that the world could create a nightmare like that. That the memory of my wife's death could be twisted into something that looked like me." He stopped, his voice cracking. "For 4 years, I have felt responsible. Not because I did it, but because I wasn't there to stop it. I've lived with this ghost, this feeling that I am a magnet for tragedy. And when that sketch appeared, it felt like the ghost had finally taken my face. It felt like a confirmation of every dark thought I've ever had about myself." He looked at her, his eyes pleading for her to understand the irrationality of his grief. "I wasn't scared of you accusing me. I was scared of me. I was scared of this darkness I carry. I thought I was protecting you by running away, by cutting the poison out of your life. It was a selfish, cowardly, and terrible thing to do. I made you pay the price for my own fear." Tears were streaming down his face now, unchecked. The polished, controlled CEO was gone, replaced by a broken man laying his soul bare in a humble bakery. "I fell in love with you, Clara," he confessed, the words a torrent of pent-up emotion. "I fell in love with your warmth, your strength, your kindness. You and Lily, you brought me back to life. You showed me that my world didn't have to be cold and empty. And that terrified me more than anything. Because loving you meant I could lose you. And I couldn't bear that. So I did the one thing that would guarantee it. I pushed you away." He took another step, his hands open at his sides in a gesture of surrender. "I am done running from ghosts. I am done letting the past steal my future. I love you. And if you will let me, I want to spend the rest of my life proving that I can be the man that you and Lily deserve." Clara listened, the anger and hurt inside her slowly melting away, replaced by a wave of overwhelming empathy. She saw past the billionaire and the terrified man. She saw the grieving husband, the loving father, the soul who had been lost in the dark for so long. She saw Julian. The tears welled in her own eyes. She closed the distance between them and wrapped her arms around him, holding him tightly. He buried his face in her shoulder, his body shaking with the force of his sobs. She held him, her own tears soaking his rain-dampened jacket, and in the quiet, warm bakery, surrounded by the scent of bread and healing, two broken hearts began to mend into one. Months later, the autumn sun cast a long, golden glow over the park. The same festival was underway, a vibrant kaleidoscope of colors, sounds, and joyous chaos. But this year, everything was different. At the stall for the Humble Crumb, which was now twice as large and bustling with customers, Clara handed a cookie to a small child, her smile easy and bright. The worry lines around her eyes were gone, replaced by the soft creases of happiness. Beside her, wearing a flour-dusted apron over a casual but expensive shirt, was Julian. He was no longer a ghost at the feast. He was laughing, his arm wrapped securely around Clara's waist, his presence warm and grounded. He looked at her not with the haunted eyes of a grieving man, but with the open, adoring gaze of a man in love. Perched on his shoulders, squealing with delight, was Lily. Her world was no longer a hopeful, empty space. It was full. Her drawings were now taped all over the walls of the bakery and the refrigerator of Julian's penthouse, which was no longer a sterile monument, but a home filled with the happy clutter of a family. A news report a few weeks after Julian's apology had announced the arrest of the real hit-and-run driver, a transient who had been identified through a DNA match on a piece of evidence found at the scene. The news had been a quiet relief, a final closing of a painful chapter, but it was ultimately irrelevant. Julian's innocence had never been in question in the only place it mattered, in Clara's heart. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, the three of them took a walk by the carousel. Julian held Clara's hand, their fingers intertwined. Lily skipped ahead, her laughter like tiny bells in the evening air. Julian looked at the two of them, his heart swelling with a love so profound it almost hurt. He remembered standing in this very park a year ago, a hollow man in a gray suit, an island of cold in a sea of warmth. He had been so lost, so certain that his life was over. He pulled Clara closer, stopping to kiss her, a long, gentle kiss filled with gratitude and promise. "I was so lost," he whispered against her lips. She smiled, her eyes twinkling like the fairy lights in her bakery. "No, you weren't," she said softly. "You were just waiting. We were all just waiting to be found." Lily ran back to them, grabbing both their hands. "Come on," she urged, pulling them forward. "The best part is about to start." And Julian knew she was right. He looked at his new family, bathed in the warm light of the setting sun, and felt a deep, unshakable peace settle over him. They were not a collection of broken pieces. They were a mosaic, made more beautiful by the cracks they had healed together. They were home. The best part was just beginning.